Shaping policies, culture-sensitive and context-based policies in sustainable development. I'm a polemicist, not a researcher. A theoretician, not a politician, nor an academic, nor an officer of an NGO. I'm here simply because someone remembered that more than a decade ago, I wrote a small book that was one of the first to explicitly link culture to the paradigms of public planning. It was called The Fourth Pillar of Sustainability, Culture's Essential Role in Public Planning. And I think all I really did was invent a slogan that has become verging upon becoming universal. However, the content of the book, as is usual with books that are based on slogans, is largely ignored. The phrase is what has been remembered. What I'm getting at is that case studies are not one of my competencies. What I can do is describe a rational and passionate position on this topic, that is, the shaping of policy. So, here goes. Policy is an imagining of the future, a plan, an activity that is essentially and fundamentally cultural. All policy is cultural. I completely agree with Fazl Hassan Abed's contention yesterday that no development initiative can be sustainable without becoming embedded in local culture, which appears to be something that most agencies forget. I'm surprised and concerned by the apparent fuzziness of thinking about culture in this forum. 1 minute it is the way of life of the people, the next it is the professional production of cultural goods, the next it is the preservation of traditions, and on, as people constantly keep saying, culture is a multifaceted concept. And now I have to find my cursor, which appears to have disappeared, to be able to move on to the next section. There we go. I've heard a myriad of phrases. Heritage and creativity. Heritage and culture. Creativity. Then artistic creativity, presuming there's something different between the two. Heritage and then cultural heritage. The cultural sector. Creative industries. Arts and culture. The only thing that has become clear to me is that the language shifts from 1 minute to the next. So many descriptions without any apparent unifying thematic. And the fact that none of these conceptions include possibly the three most important sites of culture making, namely education, communications and media, and family relations, leads me to wonder whether, when it comes down to it, the culture that is being imagined in this context is little more than the arts. It is difficult to envisage that an entity that is so loose with its own terminology will ever have any success at convincing others to take it seriously. So, I offer the definition I developed over 10 years ago in the fourth pillar of sustainability. The term culture can be most usefully used to describe the social production of meaning, or, to be slightly more colloquial, making sense together. I know that in this forum, this description is one that, while it may be attractive to some at a theoretical level, it is not one that can be incorporated into the realpolitik of UNESCO's cultural strategies. Nevertheless, I feel obligated to maintain the struggle to have the concept of culture positioned where it can be most useful, rather than tagged to whatever objectives happen to be currently popular. My focus has always been on the process rather than the product. In fact, I'm convinced that culture's value to humanity lies in making far more than what is being made. So, let me quote, it's a bit self-indulgent, I guess, quoting from myself, but let me quote from the summary to the fourth pillar. A society's values are the basis upon which all else is built. These values and the ways they are expressed are a society's culture. The way a society governs itself cannot be fully democratic without there being clear avenues for the expression of community values, and unless these expressions directly affect the directions society takes. These processes are culture at work. Cultural vitality is as essential to a healthy and sustainable society as social equity, environmental responsibility, and economic viability. In order for public planning to be more effective, its methodology should include an integrated framework of cultural evaluation along similar lines to those being developed for social, environmental and economic impact assessment. And I guess, in the short of it, that's what I have to say about shaping policy, that all policy requires that sort of analysis and interrogation. So, in the book, I go a little way further in trying to establish what a cultural framework might be. In other words, what might be the criteria by which all policy be interrogated from a cultural perspective. So let me read this for you. Once we accept culture to mean the expression and manifestations of what it means to be human, it becomes obvious why a cultural perspective is the essential basis of all public planning. That is, the first step in the planning process has to be an engagement with the values and aspirations of those who will be affected by the plan. Unless we are clear about what the values are that inform our vision, our plan, then it's unworthy of the name and probably unworkable in realisation, or at the very least, likely to generate results at odds with its original and often unvoiced intentions. The environmental impact analysis of proposals is a familiar operation. Just as there are social, environmental and economic frameworks or lenses or filters through which plans are or should be evaluated, so should there be for culture. And just as the basic questions being asked by these frameworks are fairly simple, so too would it be with a cultural framework. So here are three. What has been the quality of community input into the development of the actual and proposed activities under review? To what extent are these activities reflective of the values and ways of life of the communities upon which they impact? Do these activities improve the capacity of communities to act and interact? Our public planning procedures need a standard method of assessing the cultural impact of all proposals. If it is accepted that cultural vitality is as essential to a sustainable and healthy society as social equity, environmental responsibility and economic viability, and that culture resides in all human endeavour, then we need a way to ensure that all public activity is evaluated from a cultural perspective. So, rather than the creation of discrete cultural policies, the most effective way forward is the development of a cultural framework that can be applied to all policy. Ideally, every activity, program, policy and plan of an entity, for example UNESCO, for example local government, should be evaluated as to its likely and or achieved impact on each of the four sustainability domains, acknowledging of course that there is significant overlap. Particularly in the cultural and social settings, realistic evaluation would have to include the analysis of research based on anecdotal evidence emanating from citizens directly involved in and or associated with the activities under scrutiny. As much of the evidence of change would be self-perceived. Furthermore, to be realistic and useful, a whole-of-society approach would need to be taken, as an entity's activities cannot be intelligently assessed without taking into account the entire environment upon which they impact. Also, long-term measurement procedures would need to be developed as the effects of initiatives will themselves be long-term. These points are raised by way of noting that wide-ranging professional and ongoing research is needed as a basis for effective evaluation, which of course we all know. But, however it's done, cultural impact evaluation has to be introduced as a mandatory activity throughout the entire public planning process. Without it, we will become an endangered species. Sounds like an exaggeration. Which is to say that for any and all policy to be culture sensitive, it must incorporate the following: active participation, active and universal engagement in the expression of commonly held and publicly negotiated aspirations, diverse authenticity, expressions that genuinely reflect the democratic discourse through which they were arrived at and that reflect the inevitable diversity inherent in all communities, continuing engagement, the development of conditions that enhance communities' capacity for ongoing action and interaction in public life. And a fourth, needs to be judged against commonly held and agreed universal values. In the musician Nick Lowe's words, peace, love and understanding. You can tell I'm a hippie. This interrogation needs to be not just applied to policy, but to the programs and initiatives that derive from policy. Now, realising the future we want for all identifies four key dimensions and identifies them as building on the three pillars of sustainable development: inclusive social development, inclusive economic development, environmental sustainability, and additionally, peace and security. The document, Realising the Future We Want for All, goes on to say that it is based on a vision for the future that rests on the core values of human rights, equality and sustainability. Now, as I understand it, UNESCO doesn't think there's a possibility of adding culture to the four key dimensions, so it's going for adding, I believe, cultural sensitivity to the three core values. And even that, by many that I've spoken to in this forum, is regarded as a fairly faint hope. Perhaps this is the best that UNESCO can hope to achieve in this moment. If so, the struggle will need to continue at other levels, which I'm sure it will. Already, there are many communities and local governments that are developing ways of democratising cultural action and empowering themselves and their constituencies to make their own meaning. No doubt, this will continue. I accept that culture is a powerful weapon that can be used for both good and evil in the pursuit of an infinitude of goals: peace and war, equity and inequity, inclusion and exclusion, consolidation and fragmentation. I accept that a not insignificant part of cultural activity can be usefully viewed from an industrial perspective: filmmaking, entertainment, advertising, education, communications, publishing, and so on. I accept that cultural initiatives may bring prosperity to individuals and communities. But I believe, what a dreadful place to lose my place. But I believe that these ways of viewing culture are insignificant when compared to its biologically based function of enhancing cooperative human enterprise and imaginative problem solving, and that these attributes are the right and the responsibility of all humans to engage in, not just a professional class. Culture offers the site in which active community engagement can be normalised and enhanced, in which citizens can experience deep connection, profound insight and fruitful collaborative action. To conclude, it is my observation that it is within bureaucracies that cultural change is most urgently needed if cultural development is to effectively take on the liberating and cohesive functions of which it is capable. If the way that the artists were treated at the opening dinner of this forum is any indication of the respect that UNESCO's high-level associates give to the arts, then there is little hope that culture will ever be viewed as anything more than decorative dressing. I apologise for being the grumpy old man in the corner, and am deeply grateful to UNESCO and the Chinese authorities for inviting me to this beautiful city where I have been able to meet so many wonderful people. Thank you very much.